and welcome to another episode of the Herd Main Show, the second episode that we're doing both on YouTube and where you normally get podcasts and whatnot. Desks weren't in the budget, and if you see my iPad flying, it's because I talk with my hands and my hands are full. Yeah. But we'll get a desk as soon as we get a couple more patrons. We'll get a desk. I'm just kidding. Yeah, this is the second episode that we're doing where we post it both to regular podcast sites as you expect from us, but we're also posting it over on YouTube, which has been pretty cool because we got some added conversation from that. We got some expanded conversation, different perspectives, which was really interesting because we were talking about such a unique topic last week. Definitely a little bit more topical than this week, where this week's very lore heavy.
Yes, very.
We're talking about a lot of lore events, kind of trying to, I guess, understand, dissect, discuss Force visions. Mm-hmm. It's a trope throughout Star Wars. Some like it, some don't. And
I personally love it.
They're weird, they're cool, and a lot of interesting things happen, which is why we wanted to have the conversations. Because Yoda has a couple throughout the Clone Wars in the final arc. And we're talking about that in the Clone Wars rewatch. So if you were coming to hopefully dissect all of that, that's coming. Well, no, this comes out on Wednesday.
Yes.
That was yesterday.
Yes.
So go to that where we talk. It's confusing. Don't try and understand it. Just do what I say. Go back to yesterday and listen to that podcast episode. And we're talking all about the finale of the Clone Wars and those visions and all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. Then come back to today, where we're just talking about all the other instances of Force-related foresight, and just trying to wrap our minds around it, because there's a lot of different instances. Mm-hmm. There's different perspectives. There's a lot of different interpretations, even. And so, we just thought it would be an interesting topic.
Foresight, more like foresight.
Foresight. That was a very forced joke.
Hey.
Anyway, so that's our topic for the day, visions of the Force. We put it out there a little late, but we put it out there on social media and such, trying to get other people's perspectives, questions, opinions on stuff. So we had a couple that we inserted in and kind of added to the show a little bit. So, but now you can see our beautiful setup. We tried to theme it off of what we were talking about.
Yeah.
If you can't guess what the parts mean, maybe they'll make sense later. But there's topic related stuff, but then there's also there's IG-88.
Oh boy.
And then there's some Rebels stuff, because
it's coming.
Rebels is coming this Friday.
It's coming.
We don't do the Clone Wars, and we're not going to do Rebels filmed. We're not going to do it the double format unless there's a lot of interest for it. Let us know. But we're planning to just do the main shows this way. So since we're not going to get to show off Rebels stuff, we thought we'd put it there.
Yeah, and also, if you look real close, there's a tiny pumpkin on top of Wicket's head.
Yeah, I think that's in frame.
I think so.
It is in frame.
Okay, well, sparkly pumpkin.
Also, Big Wicket.
Big Wicket.
Big Wicket.
Big Wicket. Small pumpkin.
These are more, if you're not on Patreon, then you didn't get to check out our after show last week, where we showed off another one of these larger Funkos.
Oh, it's so big.
Child-sized. It's a Ursula one, so we talked about some cool stuff.
I like holding my 10-inch figures like a toddler, because it just makes me feel like a mom.
So that's another reminder. So last week, in addition to doing YouTube, we also started doing an after show. It's over on Patreon, and it is exclusive. So it's not like 10 things where eventually that comes to YouTube. It is just a pure Patreon exclusive. And so,
and I will say,
if you want more Nerd Herder, check it out.
Yeah, I will say my largest Funko Pop is sitting right off screen. It's a 10-inch Bulbasaur.
I think it's the same. It's just different portion.
Well, he's on all fours, and he's got the bulb on the back, which I think adds to the size. He's dog-sized. A small dog, but still a
he's
dog.
Buddy-sized.
Oh, Buddy!
That's her parents' dog.
Oh.
He was a little Yorkie, so of course a Funko Bulbasaur is much larger than a Yorkie.
He was 14 years old.
Yeah,
old. So he was old.
So, and I put out there on Twitter, we'll probably show some more of our Funkos, because we do have a lot. But yes, Patreon, after show, support what we do, and a little bit more nerd herderness. I mean, if you're giving money to it, you gotta love it. So who wouldn't want more nerd herderness?
And speaking of supporting things that you love, this necklace, which is the Mortis dark side symbol, I guess you could call it.
It's just the dark side symbol.
The dark side symbol is from Squadron Goals.
Yeah.
On Etsy.
Yep.
And she makes fantastic stuff.
So, yeah, there's not a whole lot of news to talk about this week, which is good because that gives us more time to dig into the topic of the day, which is liable to be a full topic. So it actually works out.
We talked about the topic of the day. What's the word of the day?
The word of the day is let me finish.
Ah!
Scream, Piglet!
Don't.
She's not happy.
No. She's laying on a blanket in a warm room. Her life is so hard.
Right? You slept all day, I know
all
it.
day.
So she's below us because she has to be near us to be reminded that we have not abandoned her while we're recording.
If we move slightly to the right, she'll begin to scream.
Yeah, so... But, no, so in book news, Star Wars Reads is coming in October. If you don't know, this is a reading encouragement program event sort of thing between Star Wars and a lot of local venues. Our library hosted one last year. Most places, there's a lot of Star Wars Reads events. So definitely get out there, check out, and see if any of your local libraries or bookstores are doing anything for Star Wars Reads. You'd be surprised that most probably are, and get involved in that. If not, consider hosting your own and reaching out to start your own. It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be crazy. It can just be about encouraging others. I mean, it's meant to be about encouraging others, specifically kids, about reading. And so it doesn't have to be big. And what better way to encourage kids to read than to read Star Wars? So that's coming October. You can check out StarWars.com for more event information and all kinds of other stuff.
And if you're in the greater Georgia area, like around Augusta, come to ours. We'll be
I'd
there.
be surprised. I mean, I like obviously Michael and a couple of others, but yeah, pretty sure that our local library. Don't come to us.
Come to me.
Our house is not that big. But our library, our downtown library, hosted an event and seemed to talk about as if they were definitely planning to do it again. So, yeah, that's a way to be involved. And so, also with Star Wars books, Star Wars Myths and Fables and Crash of Fate are out now. As of Tuesday, they were released. And so we're excited to talk about those and check those out. Specifically Myths and Fables. I'm excited for Crash of Fate, don't get me wrong, but Myths and Fables is like up my alley in terms of weird Star Wars-iness and whatnot. So I'm excited for that.
And I want to mention that thing that I just did with my glasses. It was completely intentional.
Sure.
Absolutely intentional. I just wanted to get them on my face.
We are also, with that, we're reworking our book review schedule, partly because we had planned to talk about Thrawn pretty quickly after it released, but then... well, that, but also you haven't seen anything with Rebels, and that's part of the story, so I did not want to... I want you to get to Thrawn in Rebels first, before we start talking about the books. That means that talking about the Thrawn books is going to be down the road a good bit, but for you to more properly experience things and whatnot, I think that's better, because otherwise we'd be talking about a majority of Thrawn's story and then watching Rebels, and it's kind of there's this many Rebels episodes, then there's this book, and then there's this many Rebels episodes, and then there's this book, and so it's one of those instances where you kind of have to be within the show and such to get the full story. So I feel like it's better served to wait until you get to that point in Rebels. So that's going to be way down the schedule. Alphabet Squadron will be coming this month, and we are looking at... We have to wait until we get our hands on like Myths and Fables and whatnot. Crash of Fate's a traditional book, so definitely we'll be talking about that one. But Myths and Fables, I hope we can talk about. It depends if it's... I don't think it's going to be like a reference guide, so we'll see. But just know that we're going to be working out our... the best schedule for talking about Star Wars books and whatnot, and that will be a YouTube thing. So if you're not subscribed to us over on YouTube, then do that. If you're watching this on YouTube and you're not subscribed, do that.
Yes.
Were you
I
gonna say
can't
something?
wait to read about to the thing that's underneath Sereno in Dooku Jedi. The Tenocticlon. The big monster.
Uh-huh.
Can't wait to read about that.
Don't hurt yourself.
What is it called?
It's terracotta or something like that.
Terrascasi?
Terrascasi.
Yeah.
No.
Dryden taught me.
Yeah, it's like terracotta or something.
It's like Tuataka?
Taco cat.
It's a taco cat.
Taco cat!
Just the ground rumbles and Sereno just me.
Yeah. An interesting category of news, Discord news, which is also kind of Patreon news, which is also kind of everything Nerd Herder news.
Mm-hmm.
We're adding in a new feature with Patreon to where there's going to be more Patreon exclusive channels to our Nerd Herder, our Nerdyverse. It's part of our network, but to our Discord.
Mm-hmm.
It's super confusing. But to our Discord, we're going to be adding Patreon exclusive channels, meaning you have to be a part of Patreon starting at least $1 to gain access. But essentially what it's going to be is we're going to have channels where we post questions and start discussions that lead into episodes. So, for instance, we're going to have a Rebels Rewatch channel where we're going to say, hey, this week we're talking about these episodes. Check it out and let us know what you think of these episodes. If you have anything that pops out at you, any favorite moments, so forth. So, like, we're literally going to be talking about the episodes with you and then building the episodes, and you and your opinions and thoughts can get on the episode. And we'll be doing that with Rebels, we'll be doing that with books, we'll be doing that with a lot of other things. And at the highest tier of Patreon support, you actually get into the Discord channel called Episode Builders, where you are along with us in the main show topics and other things, to where we say, hey, we're talking about this, what do you think? Hey, what's your favorite this? And basically, by being a part of Patreon, you get more direct input to episodes and you get more spotlight in episodes. And so if you'd like to have a greater part in the conversation, then we recommend that you check out at least $1 a month over on Patreon and join our Discord and get in there. There's still a general chat and community tab on there to where we can just chat and hang out and share Star Wars memes and just have fun. But as far as getting rooted in what we do, that's going to be something we do for Patreon's upcoming. So that's exciting. We're talking about Rebels. We're starting that this Friday, so if you'd like to get in on the conversation now, then definitely check out our Patreon page following this episode and see how you can be a part. It starts at $1 a month, so it's really not that much of an investment, but it goes a long way to us to support the show. So
Definitely.
Yeah, there you go. So that's kind of the news, which most of it was about us, I guess.
I guess so.
But it's fine.
You have any more us news?
Not really. Am I supposed to?
No.
You said that kind of forebodingly.
I've lit so many Halloween, well, not Halloween, fall themed candles. I'm pretty sure it's Halloween.
It's Halloween.
Let's be real, it's Halloween themed. I'm pretty sure the inside of my nose is gonna smell like pumpkin spice for the next 3 years.
Yes, I can't
I'm
wait
so
until
excited.
Christmas when I can do pine again.
You can do pine anytime of year.
Uh-huh.
It's a great
It's
smell.
it's choked out by the pumpkin smell, but it's fine. Just got 3 more months of Halloween.
I can't eat pumpkin pie, so therefore I must smell it. And
Who would
smell
want
like
to?
it. Me!
I don't like pumpkin pie.
Get out of here.
I don't like pie. But I do like Star Wars. So, want to talk about Star Wars?
Sure.
Sure. Okay. That's much more exciting than pumpkin pie.
I miss pie.
I don't. So again, we're talking about Force visions, visions of the Force. We're looking at instances where some trippy stuff happens with the Force and certain characters, and we're going to talk about some of the more well-known instances of Force visions, like obviously the cave scene in The Last Jedi. I'm pretty sure it'll come up at some point. The cave on Dagobah with Luke. You know, instances of where people are, obviously, that's what your mind jumps to with Force visions. But we're also going to talk about other things and Force visions in other media, including TV shows, comics especially, and just kind of look at, trying to, I guess, understand Force visions.
Mm-hmm.
Because, again, like, it's even an element of the lore. Force visions can go any which way.
Yes.
They can be interpreted different ways, and certainly Star Wars fans interpret them in various ways.
And certain things can be interpreted as Force visions, specifically Mortis.
Yes. I mean, there were visions on Mortis, but
Yes.
as to whether the whole thing... So, yeah, stuff like that. Where... And what that means. What does that mean for our understanding of the Force? What does that mean for our understanding of these characters? What does that mean for our understanding of Star Wars as a whole? Because obviously a big part of Star Wars is the Force. And I think Force visions are some of the clearest glimpses into sort of the economy of the Force that we get. Because it's just the Force communicating to a character or to a group of characters. And we get the eagle-eye view of fans by reading these stories and seeing these stories.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it was kind of just sparked by the finale of the Clone Wars because there's some interesting stuff there.
Some very interesting stuff.
But I think we're going to talk about some interesting stuff because I think there's probably at least a couple on here that not everyone that watches or listens to this knows of. I mean, we're going to talk about some that, yeah, definitely, I've heard of that, I've seen that, or I know about that. But then I'm pretty sure there might be a couple that it's like, oh, I didn't know about that.
Mm-hmm.
And some are weirder than others and whatnot. So it's one of those things where, seeking to understand an element of this story that we love so dearly and also to share. Maybe you're not a comic reader and haven't heard about half of these.
Yeah, we were reminded very recently that not everyone goes the deep lore dives that we do.
Yeah, we want to make sure, and this is just a reminder to us.
Yeah.
I mean, we thought we were doing pretty good at this, but apparently we can do better in terms of making sure that it's on a level that no matter what your fan level is, you have a level of understanding. Making sure, like, not to talk about things as if, like Mortis, not just name dropping that as if everybody knows what that is and so forth. And so we're going to try and do better at that. So if it sounds like we're explaining something and you're like, oh, I already know what that is, you do, but not everybody does. And we want to be better fans and better hosts in orchestrating this conversation by opening it up to not feel like, oh, I haven't seen the Clone Wars, so I shouldn't listen to this because I'm not going to understand it. We want you to listen whether you've seen it or not. We hope you see it first, but that's a lot of episodes to watch. Yeah. And really, we want you to listen and watch the episodes that we put out. So I'm going to go ahead and say general spoiler alert.
Yes.
I'll keep saying that, but hopefully... I mean, we don't want to scare you off. We want you to listen, but we also want you to experience these things the way you want to experience these things. And we don't like being spoiled. We don't want to be the spoilers. So, Anyway, set up aside. So, I guess to start off, what do you think of Force Visions as a whole? In all that you've seen, read, and whatnot, what do you think of Force Visions?
I've always thought of them as kind of like what I understand of the fates in Greek mythology. Like, it's things that could come to pass. It's not, set in stone that this is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that's not a fixed point in time yet.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I like the concept of an unsure future when it comes to, future vision and stuff like that. So I've never been a fan of the nihilistic view of, this is the future as it's going to come to pass. You're going to try to change it, but you end up making it happen. Although that has happened in Star Wars. But yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy a Force visionary too,
Mm-hmm.
I think they serve a great purpose in story-wise because they kind of tip off the audience as to what's going to happen, but also keeping it vague, if that makes sense.
I guess so. Do you get why some wouldn't be fans of it? I mean, you're a fan of it.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of it. Spoiler alert, I'm going to talk in a minute. But, you're a fan of it. Do you get how people wouldn't be a fan of it?
Oh, absolutely.
Because that is a criticism. A lot of people aren't a fan. It's almost as much of a sin as time travel in storytelling for some people as to how, time travel, it's cheap.
Yeah, I mean, as a fan of not only Back to the Future, but Doctor Who, I get why people don't enjoy time travel as a story element, but at the same time, I love it so much.
Well, what I appreciate about Doctor Who, it's always made time travel complicated.
Yes.
It's wibbly wobbly.
Yes.
Timey-wimey.
And there are multiple, timelines.
Right, so
Existing
at least Doctor Who
linearly.
acknowledges it can't just be as easy as go back and fix it, or go forward and fix it, or so forth and so on. So I think that's a general criticism is there's no stakes because you could just go back in time and change it, or there's no stakes because they know what's going to happen so they can fix the problem. Because the story usually is you've got a hero and you've got a problem, and the story is them trying to solve or prevent this problem. So by having like the episode with Ahsoka,
Yes.
where she gets visions, and that's a good point too. Is there seems to be different variety of visions, different communications of the Force, but just to keep it general in terms of, because this is more premonitions than visions, I think, because she sees, Aura Singh's going to try and kill Padme.
Yes. I get you.
So there's an episode of the Clone Wars where she's kind of stricken for some reason. It doesn't quite come back, but she's stricken with visions of events that are going to happen, and the whole episode is her trying to prevent them. So it's one of those instances where it's like the criticism and why a lot of people don't like that episode is the whole thing is she knows what's going to happen and she's trying to stop it.
Yeah. But she doesn't know how it's going to happen.
See, exactly. Because, like, the reason I like that and the reason I like, there's that Jake Gyllenhaal movie where it's the train and he keeps getting sent back in time to stop a bomb on the train. It takes a lot of tries because even though he's got a few minutes, and even though he knows he's got to stop this thing, he doesn't go in knowing how to stop it. So I think there's still stakes. It's just different. If anything, it's more complicated.
Like the Mothman prophecies. You remember that movie, Richard Gere?
No.
It's awful.
Sure.
Or like, what's the Christopher Walken Stephen King adaptation? It's got
Silver Bullet?
No, it's got that. He was in Silver Bullet.
I don't know. I'm just saying things.
Dead Zone? The Dead Zone?
Don't I just said I don't know. I'm just saying words.
I think that's it. Piglet, the Dead Zone?
Sure. He was in there with Garlic Jr.
Yes.
Yeah.
She just gave me the most incredulous look.
Like, how dare you?
I was taking a shower.
I don't know. I guess it just depends on your perspective, because I don't quite get the whole time travel cheapens things either. I mean, at the end of the day, if those are your opinions, then those are your opinions.
Yeah.
And I think that can be valid. I don't understand it, but I don't mind time travel. Most instances that I've enjoyed time travel, it's been a really good, complicated, unique style. It's never been it's not like Quantum Leap realms of goofiness.
It is super good.
But also with visions, like Force visions, I don't think Star Wars has ever used it to a point that it's been cheap for me. Again, even with the Clone Wars episode with Ahsoka, it felt like it complicated more than helped the situation. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think if there's any criticism of that episode, it's just that it just didn't seem to have a point, and that's something we're going to talk about.
It was an in-between an arc.
Right, it's just hey, wouldn't it be cool if this happened?
Yeah.
And that's something I want to talk about, because it seems like some can or are more susceptible to Force visions than others.
Yeah, and some are more encouraged to lean into their Force visions than others.
True. Again, referencing that Clone Wars episode where Ahsoka goes to Yoda for advice, and it's a very similar situation to episode 3 when Anakin's like, hey, I had visions, people die, and Yoda to Anakin is more like,
don't worry about it. It's all good, fam.
In a very cheap way to put it, yes. But in Ahsoka's instance, it's more of listen, feel it out, search it out, see if you can figure it out.
Funnily enough, both about Padme dying.
I feel like, though, that's Yoda saying, I trust Ahsoka with interpreting her visions more than Anakin. Because, let's be honest, kind of valid point.
Yeah?
I mean, let's be
you're
honest.
Not wrong. It's valid, but still.
So, that's... so, again, if you're watching this, that's a part of the reason Anakin's up here. And Vader, we're going to talk about Vader, is because he seems to have... So Anakin even seems to have a connection.
Yeah.
He saw visions of his mother. He saw visions of Padme. And we know that at least on one instance, he had a vision as Vader. Mm-hmm. So...
Oh, such a good comment.
Do you think it has to do with him being the chosen one, that he would in some way seem to kind of just be tuned into the Force in that way? Or do you think it's just more of just the story called for it? Like, I don't...
I think it's a dual thing where it has to do some with his being the chosen one, being in tune with the Force, possibly more than others, but he's also in tune with his emotions more than the other Jedi. Mm-hmm. And he's also more receptive to, his emotions within the Force, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that he'd have more clear channel.
Yeah.
But, so, that's the thing, though, is what do you think constitutes being susceptible to Force visions? Like, what do you think the host has to be or do in order to... Because it doesn't seem like it just happens normally.
It seems like in the two examples that we've given, Ahsoka and Anakin, it seems like attachment is a factor. Like, I think both Anakin and Ahsoka are in some way attached to Padme, therefore they're more likely to experience Force visions about Padme.
That's interesting. I mean...
I did a smart.
Now, but what about when it seems like Force visions are forced on an individual, i.e. Sifo Dyas? Sifo Dyas doesn't seem to want his visions, doesn't seem to ask for his visions, doesn't seem to meditate oh, let me have a vision. No, it seems like it's just like the Force just busts in his door like Big Bird and is like, you're having a vision.
That's such a good analogy.
I mean, it's almost like you should be able to control this, but the dam is broken. Like, the Force just comes through when it's not meant to. The waters rise when it's not meant. It's interesting. What do you think is the case surrounding Sifo Dyas?
First of all, please, darn, we're a family show.
What? Oh gosh. You're fired.
The levee broke. No.
The water was dry. I'm sorry. Okay. You can't say those kinds of things and not expect me to break out into American Pie.
But when you start breaking out into American Pie, eventually you're going to get to The Saga Begins.
Exactly. Every time. Every song that Weird Al has covered, eventually you start as that song, but then you go into Weird Al. Easy.
We know I Want It That Way, word for word, but eventually we go into eBay.
Right. It just happens.
Yeah.
So Sifo Dyas.
Sifo Dyas. If you haven't read Dooku Jedi Lost, please, or if you haven't listened to it.
Well, because... Possibly, you can read it soon. It is happening, but if you don't get it on Audible, that's the only way. Because, I mean, outside of that, honestly, you get one instance of, Sifo Dyas had premonitions.
Yeah.
And that's in the finale of the Clone Wars. That's the spark of that final arc is... Sifo Dyas is a key factor. Mm-hmm. Sifo Dyas is a key part of what sparks the whole, I gotta go on a journey. Yeah. I gotta figure this stuff out from Yoda. And so, essentially, without getting into spoilers for Dooku Jedi Lost, it's newer. I really want people to check that out.
I really want to talk about it, though.
Well, we can talk... to a point.
Yeah,
so
to a point.
What I'll set up is that in Dooku Jedi Lost, we journeyed with Dooku throughout his younger years as a Jedi.
And if you don't recognize the name Sifo Dyas, in Attack of the Clones, he's mentioned as the commissioner of the Clone Army.
Supposedly. Master Sifo Dyas died almost 10 years ago. Like...
I'm still unsure as to why you say supposedly when you say that.
Well, Because Clone Wars finale.
Yeah.
It wasn't Cypher Diaz.
It wasn't
Spoiler
Cypher
alert.
Diaz.
So
Right.
I gotta get spoiler alert. It wasn't Cypher Diaz. Sorry.
You can like flash it up
Right.
on the screen.
Oh yeah.
Spoiler
Epileptic
alert.
shock. Anyway, so Dooku Jedi Lost is an audio novel that explores those younger years, and Dooku and Cypher Diaz were very close.
Mm-hmm.
At some point in his maturity, Cypher Diaz gets stricken, almost like seizures, with visions of the Force. And eventually, it started to wear down on him, of course, but eventually he just breaks and he sees a vision that the Jedi are going to take over and
Yes.
that the Republic needs an army. And that's how we get the Clone Wars. And so,
Such a good concept.
he's an instance where
Yeah.
it never seems like he could control that.
Yeah.
It wasn't about meditation. It wasn't about concentrating. It wasn't about searching your feelings. It was about... the best thing I can compare it to is epileptic shock. It's like just sudden seizures.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird. So
It is very weird.
surrounding his character, what do you think of that, and how do you think that fits into our understanding of... Because it seems like one of those things where it's like, is that a problem with him? Is that a problem with the Force?
Mm-hmm.
Can we really justify the Force doing that to him, knowing the effect that it has?
Oh yeah, because it almost kills him a couple times.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
The thing that I can most closely like relate it to is stories I've heard and read about of possession.
Mm-hmm.
Like whether that be, something that you believe in or not. There are many histories of it. And that's like the thing that's what I think of when I listen to, Cypher Diaz's story.
Mm-hmm.
Possession by the Force? Maybe?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, because I don't know.
Well, but I think that's fair, but then we get into the question, possession is usually related to darker spirits, demons, such.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's one of those weird instances where our understanding of the Force is that there's... Okay, well, this is why I thought this would be an interesting conversation. And again, feel free, hit any of the buttons to just really join the conversation on this. We really want these to open those kinds of conversations. Do you think the dark side is a part of the Force or the way you use the Force?
There is no dark without light. There is no light without dark. They are intertwined completely.
And I think that's what we learned from Mortis. So if the Force does have both parts to it, then does that mean that the dark side could induce visions just as much as the light side could?
Absolutely. I mean, we see that kind of in the Mortis arc.
Yeah. So the Mortis arc is part of the Clone Wars where it gets like Star Trek levels of other dimensions, weird Force beings. It gets really out there, and part of that is we see embodiments of the Force. We see the father as the balance, we see the son as the dark side, and we see the daughter as the light side. We cannot completely cover the idea of Mortis in this episode.
Yeah.
We did a Clone Wars rewatch on those episodes. We did a main show discussing it more. So I encourage you to check those out for deeper things. But essentially, the son, and this is a good transition into further points because we're going to talk about this. The son shows Anakin a vision of his future. Mm-hmm. Anakin doesn't want to see, but he does. He becomes aware of the things he's going to do and who he's going to become.
And if you're saying to yourself, "Oh, that doesn't happen," or "that makes no sense," it all gets erased from his brain.
Yeah, but I mean that's essentially how they handle it. Is the father takes away the memory of it.
Yes.
There's a cat.
There's a cat. This is Pinky.
She's kind of... Yeah, there you go.
She's kind of a jerk.
She wanted to be a part of it.
She wanted my...
She heard us talking about the dark side and wanted to be a part of that.
Yeah.
So...
It's dark side.
The son representing the dark side gave Anakin a vision. So, yeah, I guess supposedly we could interpret it that if the son is meant to represent the dark side and he could give visions just as easily as I'm sure the daughter could, then that could happen with the Force.
The cat just drooled like a puddle on my iPad.
She just loves this topic
She's
so much.
So nasty.
She's so happy.
So gross.
Hi, baby. This is what you... So if you're watching this on YouTube, you get a much better experience.
Give this child attention so she'll stop drooling.
That's why she drools.
It's true.
Anyway.
I'm gonna move this.
So, to continue with Mortis and Anakin, in that instance, the son's narrative for showing Anakin the vision was... First of all, do you think that's the only vision? Do you think that's the vision on Mortis, or do you think the whole thing is a vision?
I kind of think that it's I don't know, because I've gone back and forth so much. Like, I want to believe that it's not just a Force vision, because, you know, we've heard on Dathomir they have the legend of the fanged beast.
Mm-hmm.
Is one of their gods. I think this is a manifestation of the Mortis gods through a Force vision.
So, and that's something we're going to talk about with the whole, how does Mortis fit in with what we learn in the Clone Wars finale, because another element of the Force is introduced there with the Force priestesses.
Yes.
Who are part of the will, which is... The Wills was the original... Yeah, W-H-I-L. That was kind of the original concept for the Force as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And Star Wars even was originally supposed to be Journal of the Wills.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of lore to the Force. It is just an energy, but apparently it's also embodiments. We get the Mortis gods, father, son, and daughter. We get the Force priestesses. I mean, and if you've seen Rebels, we get the Bendu.
You keep telling me you don't know the Bendu. What is the Bendu?
Exactly.
What?
Exactly.
Is the Ow.
Exactly. She didn't like our yelling.
No.
Exactly.
What's the Bendu?
Yes.
Why does it
Yes.
look like a yak?
Yes. All the yes.
Help.
Help. It's one of those things. How are they the Force? Are they representations of the Force? Are they just connected to the Force?
It's like, how does Mother Talzin appear to be alive but still just like fluid?
Yeah, like
evident fluid throughout the galaxy.
And okay, so and that's an interesting thing is there seems to even be a Force ethereal plane. We're gonna talk. So I saved Darth Vader number 25 discussion.
Yes.
The comic issue for the end because there's a lot to discuss and I want to
so much spoilers.
It's just a lot. So, but in there, that seems to really confirm, hey, there is some sort of other plane that you can enter.
Oh my gosh.
And it's really weird.
I would read like an Art and Arcana sized book about the different planes.
I don't
to Star Wars.
I don't want George Lucas's whole microscopic symbiotic midi-chlorian exploration trilogy that he planned to give us for 7, 8, and 9.
Yeah.
God love the man, but I cannot say that I'd be the slightest bit interested in that. I do want more of the mythology of the Force and the weirdness of it. I don't want the science of the midi-chlorians. I want the mysticism of Mortis. I want the weird stuff.
And I'm hoping that that's what we get from Myths and Fables.
Some.
I
And that's...
I want to read more about Sith animals.
Well, and that's also why I want to go more Old Republic, where that's more commonplace.
The mysticism was still intact.
Right, because where we come into the story by the prequels, they've clinicalized the Force and the Jedi and all of this other stuff. And so I think with the Old Republic, there's a lot more potential for, let's get weird with it.
Yeah.
Let's just have fun with the Force. So.
No, just resting.
Anyway, if it seems like we're bouncing around, there is a script to this, but the thing is, in talking about one, it kind of branches into another.
Yeah, and also...
And it just keeps pinging around.
Wibbly wobbly.
Wibbly wobbly timey-wimey.
This is my timey-wimey detector. It goes ding when there's stuff. Which is my favorite Doctor Who quote from my favorite episode.
It's the best. Mm-hmm. So to try and get through some of what we plan to discuss, I didn't expect so much lead into the conversation to be so much, but who knows? We might even have to do a part 2. We'll see. But let's start with let's talk about some specific Force visions. Like that was kind of the track, is that we would talk about Force visions as a whole and then try and dissect individual Force visions.
Yeah.
I think we've talked, I mean, we could go longer, but I think we've done as much as we need to in laying the groundwork for Force visions and kind of the weirdness of it and how many ways there are to interpret it, especially when you get into Mortis stuff. That's a very big one for a lot of people of, is it or isn't it? Is it real? Is it not? And what does it mean if it is? And so forth and so on. But so we put out there, like I said, on Twitter and said, hey, we're talking about Force visions. Let us know your thoughts, all this other stuff. Jim Capron, one of our patrons, hi Jim, thank you so much.
Jim.
He, as always, brought anytime you talk to Jim or tweet with Jim, no one loves Rogue One and no one loves weird parts of Star Wars quite like Jim, in the sense that it's not so much a competition, but it's like the way he loves and shares that love is not like anyone else's.
It's inspiring.
And so sure enough, he had a perspective on Rogue One I'd never had, and that's really, really interesting.
No, like I had to go back and watch to
it
see
was
what
like,
he was talking about.
Wait, I never thought of it this way. So Jim replied that his favorite Force vision would be Jin's Force vision, Jin Erso. And if you're like us, that was a quick, like, wait,
when did that happen?
Before Jeddah, Galen tells her, I'll always protect you. Lyra tells her, trust Galen. And then the vision ends with Saw. So it's hinted from the Force that despite how Jin resents her father and Saw, she's going to have to trust them sooner or later.
Yes.
You're fine. I had always kind of taken this as just a dream that she was having before they arrived on Jeddah. But when you do get into... I mean, had you ever thought of it this way?
No.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure we were kind of on the same page. Having read the novelization as well as read Catalyst, that are both great contexts and assets to the Rogue One experience as a whole, Lyra specifically has quite the connection and fascination with the Force.
Yes.
And seems to share that in such a way with Jin. And Jin carries a kyber crystal, which we know are not just crystals, but also are objects that commune with the Force. So it's one of those it could be the Force.
Yeah.
And that would be interesting, mostly because Jin's not a Jedi or trained in the Force, or in a lot of ways I'd even say she doesn't even probably believe much in it.
And I think that's a testament to what we've been told and shown throughout the series as a whole. I'll call it a series. Is that the Force doesn't belong to the Jedi. It doesn't belong to the Sith. It flows through us, everyone. Like, how Chirrut wasn't a Jedi, and yet
True.
he had such a great connection with the Force.
True.
And he believed in it wholly.
I think that is a very interesting way to look at it, and I don't see any problem with it.
Yeah.
I think it works. I think that's super duper cool.
And I think it's one of those things, like, the more you are open to that connection with the Force, and the more you believe in the Force, I think the more connected you are with it.
I think it goes back to what you were talking about in terms of, Anakin more in touch with his emotions, and as a byproduct is more in touch with the Force. Obviously she's going back to Jeddah, and it's kind of, or at least a place she's familiar with, certainly the Force is familiar with, and she's on this sort of personal spirit journey as well. I think it has to do with, I think she was just in the kind of place where she tuned in with the Force.
Yeah.
And I guess that is possible for anyone in some way or another.
Heck yeah, man.
So,
Shoot
really
your shot
interesting.
with the Force.
So I wanted to talk. So back a few months now, they did a series of comic runs for, you had Age of Republic, we had Age of Rebellion, we're currently in Age of Resistance, and it's just one-shot stories about different characters. 3 of the Age of Republic the Age of Republic comics had to do with Force visions,
Yeah.
which is really interesting. One was Qui-Gon, and he kind of has a crisis of faith and goes on the spirit journey to search out sort of meaning to what he believes in.
Yeah, he's a crisis of faith, and he's kind of starting to see the cracks.
Yes, there is a lot of great Qui-Gon quotes and content in this, even visions aside.
Mm-hmm.
I highly recommend Age of Republic Qui-Gon. It is really good stuff, and he's very spot on with his criticisms of the Jedi.
Yes.
And his solution to, I don't want to be a soldier, I don't want to be, I want to be close to the Force, is to go on a Force journey.
Mm-hmm.
And he has this vision to where basically he sees that if we fight, it makes it worse. Only in surrender do we win.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, it's this idea of there's another way.
Yes. There's always a third option.
Right. It's really interesting because that's very similar to some of what Yoda talks about in the Clone Wars finale. If you listen to our Monday Motivations, I talked about that, to where he basically says there's not any winning this war.
Mm-mm.
By being a part of the war, we've lost the war.
Yeah.
And that's kind of Qui-Gon's essence, I guess, in this Force experiences.
Oh yeah, I fully believe that if Qui-Gon had survived up to the Clone Wars, he would have been fully against it.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I think, where he would have drawn the line.
And that's where we get into, and I guess there's always these questions. I mean, people have them with real religion and real life,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of meant to be, destined, all of these things. Like, it seemed like the Force had plans for Qui-Gon.
Yeah.
What happened on Naboo meant to happen? Or was that, do you think that caught the Force by surprise? Or like,
I don't know.
it's one of those instances where like things happen and people are like, was it meant to be that way? Was that supposed to happen? And it's like, because it does happen, how do we define morality?
Mm-hmm.
Typically in real life, it's an instance of how can we define and believe in a God that does allow things like this to happen, or it destines things like this to happen. And with Star Wars, I see a similar conversation of what do we do with the Force if the Force allows things like that to happen, or orchestrates it all together for those things. Like, do you ever think about the morality of the Force in that instance?
No?
Just me?
Just you?
Just me, okay.
Well, that's a boring answer. I've always thought of the Force as an ever-moving, ever-changing, other adjectives, being. Not being, but force.
See, but that's the thing, is like there's a lot of mythology that seems to say there is a being or beings, or there is some sort of personality, but then there's also it's just energy, but this energy somehow has choice in the orchestrating of events and all that. Like, it's really weird and hard to understand the
It's
Force.
incredibly hard to understand. And
spoiler alert, it's also really weird and hard to understand religion and faith and all that other stuff too. Because I know I kind of touched on the real life aspect and moved away from it because that can be a whole nother thing. But
oh yeah,
it's long, big question, little answer, complicated.
and in both aspects, another boring answer, but I kind of find comfort in not knowing everything. Like, I don't have to know everything about certain things and real life or otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that goes back to the whole Jedi thing. It's just a lot of trust in the Force rather than understand the Force.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of the aspects of it. But there's definitely a lot of sides that could be interpreted or taken a certain way.
Yeah.
And it's really, really interesting. So,
yeah.
But nonetheless, whether Naboo was meant to happen or not, the Force continued to use Qui-Gon.
Yes.
Which, again, with Clone Wars in the finale, that comes to a head in some way. So, highly recommend you check that out because that's an interesting conversation as well. So, but it's just that was an interesting one. Maul also got one.
Yeah.
I don't think there was a lot to highlight.
I don't think it had much bearing.
Yeah, basically he
snorted some dead Jedi.
So okay, so that was something I wanted to mention. So when Maul was kind of first inducted,
mm-hmm.
His hatred and anger and malice comes from the fact that Palpatine more or less made him eat the ashes of dead Sith.
Yeah.
It's more than that, obviously. The essence and the dark side of the Force attached to the remains of those Sith imbued in him a great hatred of the Jedi. So then...
just like taking a big sniff of some ashes.
Yeah, basically kind of like the whole... I thought very much of Kylo Ren and Show Me Again.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was an interesting connection.
Just like...
because in Episode 7... Kylo sits in front of Vader's mask and is like, show me again the ways of the dark side. And this kind of felt like a whole... What
if it wasn't ashes from Darth Vader? What if it was ashes from Morabad?
What, for
that
for Kylo?
Yeah. Because that would make sense.
Ooh! What? That's really interesting.
Because Darth Vader, at that point that he died, wasn't a Sith Lord anymore.
Well, but
redeemed.
Even then, how would he have got... I mean, I don't think there's any lore on those ashes, like saying, "Oh, it's the remains of." Also, why would you
How would they have gotten?
Why would you
ashes?
Why would he put his grandfather's helmet on just any pile of ashes?
Exactly.
Wow.
I did a smirk.
That's really interesting, because that's.
Sometimes I can do a lore.
And it's actually Malachor, not Moraband.
Malachor. What's Moraband?
Moraband's Bane.
Malachor.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Scythy planets.
Both
Scythy planets.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really interesting because Malachor's the planet where Maul kind of gets shown again. That's really interesting.
That's such a concept.
That's a really cool theory.
Because, he wouldn't be getting nothing from the helmet itself.
Right. So it's not really... That's a case for it's not really his grandfather, it's just the dark side.
I'm going to go ahead and TM that idea.
Because what's interesting about what happens with Darth Maul on Malachor is... And you see this in the Clone Wars, he gets a line, talking about the chains and
mm-hmm.
freedom that the dark side and hate and all these emotions give, and he kind of gets a really cool when he's kind of crazy line of it's not like the external stuff, mm-hmm. it's the stuff in here.
Yes.
How long have you been here?
Years and years and years. Through victory, my dreams are broken with chains. The chains are the easy part. It's what goes on in here that's hard.
It's like they don't tell you about this stuff and how hard it is to get rid of this stuff.
Man.
Basically, the instance of the dark side imbuing with Darth Maul seemed to give him almost like this schizophrenic Force personality, because he's not, clearly he's level-headed. We see that throughout the Clone Wars, but he's also not all together. He's very crazed, very animalistic.
And it's not till like Mother Talzin kind of helps out with the initial crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that's a greater example of how he would have been completely untethered, just like lost, not himself, not human in any way.
I wish he kept the spider legs. That was pretty cool.
It seemed like what he saw and experienced was definitely not just the Force, but specifically the Force passed through the dark side filter.
Yes.
So that's a great example of how, again, the variety of Force visions and Force connections, because all he got was the dark side, anger, hate, all that stuff. It's very different than anything we see from a lot of the lighter side visions and premonitions and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I doubt that connection could ever be made or whatnot, but that's a really cool headcanon of maybe those ashes are also from Malachor. I mean, if he's a fan of the Sith, if he's a part of a cult of the Sith, like the Knights of Ren, it makes sense that they would go out of their way to find these places. They're real places. They're out there. They're get-to-able. So they got to-able in them.
Was it
Really
just me that when we see Malachor and we see all the, the ashes, the ashes in the shape of people, I thought of Prometheus. Is that just me?
Yeah, no, it's a very Prometheus, very Pompeii sort of vibe of great catastrophe.
I don't care what anybody says. I enjoyed Prometheus.
It's a good movie.
It's a good movie.
I do think we're going to have to call it here. I don't think there's any way to get to the rest of what we plan to talk about.
Nope.
But that's good news for you guys, because that means you know what we're talking about next week. We're going to pick this up where we left off. We're going to continue talking about Force visions and whatnot. Let us know what you think. This was a really ground-setting, conversation starting kind of episode to the topic of Force visions. Now that we've kind of gotten this out of the way, we'll be able next week to just dive right in of, let's talk about more Force visions. And since originally we weren't going to talk much about it because this episode was going to be long, we can talk even more about Darth Vader's vision on Mustafar.
Because boy howdy, it's going to need some time.
That's one of my big ones.
It's so cool.
So to kind of sum up, Force visions, not maybe as much of a parlor trick as a lot of people think, but understandable in some instances. But hopefully from the conversation we've had and shared, it broadens the horizons of, wow, it's not as cheap as maybe I thought, or it's not as bad as some people think.
Yeah.
Because clearly there's a lot of conversation that can surround just the Force in general, but also Force visions, because, again, we're not just talking about the Force, but how the Force interacts with people. So let us know what you think of things like Mortis, and think of the Age of Republic comics that we discussed. If you haven't checked out those comics, highly recommend them. They're really good, especially the Qui-Gon one. We talked about not only what happens on Age of Republic Maul, but also the 5-issue miniseries called Maul. There's 3 Maul comic series out. So there's Maul. Yeah, there's Maul, there's Age of Republic Maul, which is a one-shot, and then there is Son of Dathomir. That's a whole different thing. Don't get into that. That's a very different one. But we do recommend you check them out, because they're instances of expanding the universe and a lot more. In the description below, if you're on YouTube or on any of the social medias where you follow us, hopefully you are following us, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that good stuff. Hit us up. Let us know your interpretation of Mortis, your interpretation of the Age of Republic Force visions, Maul Force visions. That's why I posted it on Twitter to kind of get it out there. I wondered if anybody understood why I put Maul on here and Darth Vader and so much more. So, but that's why we put Maul there. That's why he's currently laying on the floor, because he's just tired.
He's been through a lot.
But yeah, let us know your interpretation of all that. We want to start conversations with these kinds of topics. That's why we talk about them. So hit us up, especially if you're new to some of these topics. And then just stay tuned. If you're with us on Patreon, then you get an after show after this. If not, we'll see you Friday
Something like
with
that.
Rebels Rewatch, Episode 1. And again, remember, join us on Patreon, $1 a month or more, but at least $1 a month gets you access to Discord. You can join in the conversation of building our first episode of Rebels Rewatch. We're going to talk about Spark of Rebellion, and you can have direct input into some of the things that go on with the episode and so forth and so on. So it's just a really interesting way, another way for you to be involved and to support the show. To Rebecca Diaz and Jim Capron, who do support us, thank you so much. It means the world. And know that we are going to be doing a anniversary special over on Patreon. There's going to be more coming of that soon. It might even be on social media by the time this episode really gets out. But we're coming up to a year of podcasting, and we want to do something special with Patreon as a drive to that and whatnot, and a way to thank those who want to be a part of supporting the show. So stay tuned for news of that goodness and more. And with that, I think that's it.
Yes.
Yes. So we'll see you later. Stay scruffy, guys, and may the Force be with you.
Bye-bye.